Hello, and welcome to En Route, a journey of faith and modern life. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host, and this is the podcast where we will explore the who, where, why, what, and how of religion and other topics. Welcome. Well, this episode is kind of a special one. One of the things that you may not know about me, and I don't think I have necessarily shared on this podcast, is that I am on the autism spectrum. I have what is called Aspergers. I was diagnosed in 2008 at the age of 38. When that happened, that kind of was a godsend because I think it helped answer some questions that I had about my life, some difficulties with relationships, both romantic and platonic, struggles on the job. And having that diagnosis was helpful. But I think one of the biggest things that was a challenge for me was, could I still be a pastor and on the spectrum? A pastor's job is one that tends to be doing a lot of interface with people, and with all of the kind of social skills that I had, or lack thereof, would it still work? Well, that was 13 years ago. I'm still in the ministry and trying to make it the best way I can. I think I've had some successes and some times have fallen short. But today I get to talk to a fellow person on the spectrum. His name is Dwight Welch. He is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. And he also, as you can tell, has also has kind of come to terms with being both on being a pastor and being on the spectrum. And so the whole point of today's episode is one where we'll talk about what are some of the challenges of being a pastor on the spectrum, and also what are some of the blessings? Because while being autistic can have its challenges, and believe you me, there are challenges, I think that there are also advantages. There are also things that can work out for the good. And so we have a kind of free-ranging discussion about being a pastor on the spectrum and kind of where faith and autism meet. And this will probably be, I'm hoping, one of the first of several times that we will get together and talk about faith and autism and where they kind of come together, where there are challenges, where there are things that I think give us an advantage. So I hope that this will be a time, if you are not on the spectrum, if you're neurotypical, to get some insight, because we are not the only pastors on the spectrum. There are many others. Hopefully this will also help you understand those members in your congregations that might also be on the spectrum. And if you are on the spectrum, I hope that this is a time that you can know that you're not alone. And so I hope that this will be helpful for you. So, as I said, we will be having a free-ranging discussion. It's going to be a little bit different from the past interviews, but it will be one that will be memorable, and I think one that you will be enjoyable as well. So, a little bit about Dwight. He is the campus pastor at United Campus Ministries in Billings, Montana, and that is an ecumenical concern that he has been a part of for a few years now, and he lives in Billings with his husband, Jim. And so now, let us hear from Dwight. Dwight, it's good to talk to you again. It's been a while.
It has been.
So, I think to start this off is when were you diagnosed with Asperger's, and what was life like? What led you to that diagnosis? What was happening in your life that made you think I need to get this checked out?
So I think we might be similar age. I grew up in the 80s,
Hmm.
and in the 80s, Asperger's, or was it in the DSM, and autism was for a very limited range of kids. Um, but when I was growing up, actually, my parents, I lived in foster families, so this set of families were kind of freaked out about me growing up as a kid. Not academically, but just
Hmm.
socially.
Socially,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, in fact, I have a letter in my possession from my school district saying we're thinking we're going to hold him back in third grade because we don't think he's socially adept enough to go into fourth grade. But then I changed school districts and that didn't happen. But there was a whole bunch of um, concerns. So I was kind of sent to various psychiatrists and psychologists. Um, and they came up with this diagnosis that so many kids got in the 80s. But I do think it was a true diagnosis, but it was ADHD.
Hmm.
But when you read, I actually have a psychological report from when I was 10 years old. When you read the report, it's entirely, it's yes, it's ADHD, but it's also Asperger's. It's also autism. They just, I mean, but there's a point where you're supposed to draw the house. You're supposed to, I was too perfectionist. I couldn't do it because I would do it and then I would erase it and I'd do it again. It was too big of a project.
Hmm.
They kind of let your imagination go, and that was the first, fail of the test because I didn't really have enough direction to kind of succeed in this. But it happened even after I got ADHD and started taking Ritalin, and in junior high, I had a, a, a meltdown at one point because I had a teacher just kind of joking, like trying to knock the books out of my as I was holding them,
Hmm.
and I was just beside myself. And they were like, "Well, that's not a usual response." So off to the child psychologist. Um, but weirdly enough, I did not get formally diagnosed until I went to seminary.
Hmm.
Yeah, because not that my 20s weren't a period of constant struggle and uncertainty and inability to launch successfully, um, that I was really, really hard on myself on, as my fellow colleagues and friends and were actually we're launching. But actually, it happened. This is probably not a surprise during clinical pastoral education, CPE.
Nope, doesn't
yeah,
shock me at
I had
all.
I had my supervisor goes, have you heard of Asperger's? And of course, I read up every single thing I could on it. and and there's a book, Asperger's from the Inside Out, and all of a
Hmm.
sudden I read that, and it was the first time I was like, that's me. All of a sudden, it wasn't weird that when I was in elementary school, I had memorized all the presidential elections and which candidate won which state and what the electoral vote was. And that's not because I'm good with memorization. It's because I was so focused on specialized bits of knowledge. Specialized bits of knowledge. Or I remember one time in junior high going, I don't like the fact that I don't remember the 70s and I don't really have a context for understanding the current events I was seeing unfold in the 80s. So I'm just going to read, starting from January of 1970, all the news weeks up to 79, so that I feel like, and this was just my fun time that I on my own. I don't want this to sound like I didn't have. It wasn't across the board in every area. I didn't have uniform school success or anything. Just if I had an interest, I would just go with it. So I read this book and I was like, and it also captured the adulthood and some of the struggles. Um, and so that was the basis for seeking a formal diagnosis. And like many folks, it was a very liberating experience
Mm-hmm.
because there were periods, self-defeating stuff, career-wise and otherwise, in my 20s and 30s. That the 30s was where I started kind of pulling in a trajectory. Yeah, I really beat myself up over. I mean, my self-esteem had been pretty knocked down. uh, that when I realized, oh, this is what I was relating with, and I just didn't know it, and I didn't necessarily have the tools. Though at one point I do remember I must have had some kind of inkling of something. I remember I always worked at motels.
Mm-hmm.
Money is because I realized I liked it, and I was afraid of any other kind of workplace that I didn't already have a familiarity with. And they kind of had their own adjustments they would make for me. And so I knew it was a safe place that I could always work. So I had already asked for accommodations before I had ever heard the term Aspergers or autism. So yeah, I was on the cusp where I got the diagnosis of Asperger's.
Mm-hmm.
And then soon after that, the DSM changed to put it all together and under
Okay.
one. Yeah. So yeah, that was kind of my. Like I said, I think I grew up always being a question mark for my teachers, and foster parents and how to negotiate this. But it came with flip sides. I remember one time um, I got in trouble. Had to stay after school with the teacher, and I loved it. I couldn't think of a better thing to do. Can't go out to recess. Have to hang out and talk to teachers. Like we should do this every time. I'll hang out, talk to the teachers. And at one point, I think it was my fifth grade teacher was like, this is supposed to be a punishment. This is not supposed to be enjoyable. So yeah, and also once I had the diagnosis, that's when the light bulb turned on about
Mm-hmm.
could this be a gift in ministry to lean on, or is this inherently a barrier that I have to struggle with? So far, it's been both.
Mm-hmm. That
but
sounds familiar.
yeah, I was kind of curious your sense of it. Because we're about the same age, I think.
Well, I just turned 52 last month.
Okay, you're a few years. I'm 49.
Okay.
Yeah.
But close, relatively close in age. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I was diagnosed around, let's see, I was 38 when I was diagnosed. And what led me to that diagnosis was kind of like you, there were certain positions, jobs I had that just did not turn out well. Relationships, both romantic and otherwise, sometimes didn't work well. And so I was just always wondering what's happening here. And what was interesting that this was around 2007. I got a job working in a presbytery, the office for the area presbytery for Presbyterians, and it was doing communications, and a lot of that was a lot of stuff on the computer, and that's where I really felt I thrived. And it's like, well, this is interesting. Why is this job working out better than everything else? And I started doing some reading myself, and I think one of the books that I read was by John Elder Robinson. And as I read it, it's like, okay, I think that sounds like me. And I took a test for that and did come out with Asperger's. And it's also interesting because I did take another test about a year or two ago that strangely also said something more about ADHD. And the psychiatrist thought, well, maybe it's actually more ADHD than it's Asperger's. And which is interesting because I tend to think that those two tend to be comorbid.
Mm,
There's a lot of things that they share in common. So I don't doubt that. I just think it's not necessarily one or the other. I think it can be both. Um,
yeah.
and I think what's interesting has been for me is, and this has always been interesting, is how people understand if you ever tell them
Yes.
they have Asperger's, especially in the church, but even outside of the church, because at least as far as I know, they don't understand um, at all.
No,
It's a,
I had a ministry context where it was used against me.
oh dear.
Yeah. But it was everything was dysfunctional about this particular ministry setting. So that wasn't a surprise. That was in Kansas. And then I went to Oklahoma. I'm like, you know what? It's just not safe to talk about it. So I won't. And of course, I have a child psychologist as a member of my church. And within 2 Sundays, he's like, Do you, are, this is what I'm seeing. And I realized I had to kind of be public or try to figure out a way to parlay it in the same way that I was the fact that I'm gay. There had to
Mm-hmm.
be a way to make this a bonus for me and not a.
Yeah, yeah.
But the when it was used against me, it was a realization um, that it's kind of an odd situation. But like I was not only acceptable, I was more than acceptable. In fact, a bit of a source of pride that you could have a gay pastor, and isn't this amazing? But when it came to disability, all of a sudden these kind of open religious contexts didn't have any language to talk about that, and you could see the disappointment because they really want to have a pastor that's much more. My husband Jim has the term Bob executive. So you've met these pastors, right? I mean, and especially some of them are the big steeple churches, you know. And I mean, I've been in mainline churches that have over 1,000+ members, especially when I was in Kansas. And there's a certain persona and way of presenting yourself that makes you a clear, upstanding member of the community, and that also is a source of pride in some mainline churches.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband was saying, we've been as Bob executives don't go to seminary anymore and don't aspire to lead churches, at least in the mainline. It's been replaced by Nancy Nerd, and Nancy Nerd doesn't fit kind of the ideals of what some of these churches wanted, and so there's this weird, not like great to have a gay pastor, not sure what to do with Asperger's.
Yeah, I can get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't. I think people can understand um, sexuality a lot more easier than they can um, disability. And I think especially when that is a disability like Asperger's, because it's not something that you can easily pin down and say this is how it is, because the old saying is that if you've met someone with Asperger's, you've met someone with Asperger's. Everyone is different. There's not a type, and it's just I think it's hard for people to at least wrap their minds around this, and especially if you are someone that is, I think how they would say, um, maybe don't don't need a whole lot of supportive services, so you look independent, and so they're thinking, well, what's the problem here? You don't seem like you have a problem. And that's always been, I think, a challenge for me.
Yeah, it's because it relates to one's social skills, which is exactly what a pastor is. So people kind of lean on for. Um, that becomes tricky in a way. Not every disability would affect social skills, but
No.
in particular, pastors are seen in that light. So yeah, there isn't a whole lot of allowance, which is why it's amazing. Still to this day, I see almost no literature on the subject of being autistic and in religious leadership. I've basically seen your blog posts, and there is an evangelical African American.
Yep. I think his
What's
first
his
name is
name?
Lamar, and I cannot
Lamar
remember his last
Hartley?
name. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's just got a new book on disability, which I need to get. And there's a new book on autism and faith that came out and is sitting on my shelf to read. And I don't know the person's background. It's Brazos Press. Uh, but for the longest time, when I would look online about like tips, ideas, it would just be like, well, you shouldn't be in ministry. You shouldn't go.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
We'll put you under. We'll have you light the candles on Sunday. That's what we do. We're including people, not autistic people who theologize and lead worship and
Well,
yeah.
and I think that's it. People have this belief because ministry is social. I mean, you can't get around that if you're going to be a pastor in a congregation.
Mhm.
But it's not the only thing skill. There are other things that can be done that I think we would tend to excel at, and I think one of those is theologizing, thinking about the faith um,
Yeah.
in a way that sometimes we don't always do as well as a culture. And I think um, the other thing is that we've had to learn how to quote unquote pass. So we have to do a lot of acting, and if we can, we do that because we have to have some way of coping and some way of surviving. Um, and I think, if we can do that, I think we can do this. We can be pastors. It's not impossible.
And then, I think especially what I've done with campus ministry is, we have an autism club because a student kind of came up wanting social connections. So when I'm very open about my diagnosis, it's kind of freeing to college students
Mm-hmm.
in particular to go, oh, okay, like in the same way that being a gay pastor helps in certain contexts, open doors
Mm-hmm.
uh, for people who would not normally trust a pastor or trust a church. Maybe this is a trustworthy or safe place, you know. And I kind of always say, the reason I ended up in the church was ultimately because I realized that demographically, on almost every level, I shouldn't be. you know, but theology is a lot of fun, and admittedly, theology was my entryway to even considering seminary and anything else. But the other part was, when I did not socially succeed in school, at church, you just were welcome. You were just a part of the youth group, and you were just you had a whole army of elderly women who would love on you as a as a kid, and so that feeling of safety in the church, I you know is something I experienced, and one of the things that's so hard to read about, like the deconstruction stories, is when people don't feel that level of safety. But I
Mm-hmm.
felt more safe as an autistic kid at church than I did at school.
Really? Why do you think that was?
That's a good question. I don't know. My one initial thought is a lot of these kids I kind of grew up with, so maybe there was kind of familiarity. Like I said, the adults were just so happy with any kids that were around, and especially any kids who expressed any interest in church life, which I did. Like I was the only kid who showed up for junior high Sunday school. Me and the Sunday school teacher, and we'd go get some donuts and try to talk theology and Bible. And so I think it was partly that. And maybe it was just kind of the context of you're at church, so this is how you socially behave. Um, and I would say I did well in high school because you could find your own subgroup. So before
Mm-hmm.
there was church group. and Sunday school, and those are in church camp and all vacation Bible school, but they were all kind of just geared towards how can we have students have a good experience of being loved and supported, and that's kind of the logic.
Mm.
So at least into high school, church was kind of like the linchpin for me for all that. And yeah, the theology part is, I think that's big too, just because um, I think it's a challenge in the mainline church, anyways, to how to think through these religious categories. There's this weird relationship to the tradition, and some of these words seem so foreign, and so I feel like a translator guide. Here comes the meal, um, and that are valuable. So I can see all those as strengths,
Hmm.
um, strengths of ministry. I mean, I kind of feel like, because there was points in time, especially in my 20s, where I thought, I don't know if I should be in the church. And there was also, there's a wonderful stubbornness in autism. I mean, and in particular, it's okay to be different. And even though that's a source of frustration, there could be a source of pride in a good sense, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like I have this unique thing that's mine. And I have a feeling that's helped autistic kids and adults down the road to have those unique areas. And for me, probably church is that too.
So, why do you think
Mhm.
that there hasn't been that much material about autism and faith? And it seems like in some ways, where I have read it is more, and it's still not a whole lot, but it seems to be, as you said earlier, more on the evangelical side, that there's more understanding of that or picking it up more. Um,
Yeah, my kind of so that's that I've heard a lot of interesting kind of like theories, and I'm not sure which one I want to kind of rest on, except to say that um, they've done some studies now, and it's moving target, so it's hard to know where the consensus is. But when they've done studies, about 2/3 of folks on the autistic spectrum were either atheists or agnostic,
mhm.
which in the general population is more like 10%, right? Um, and so and then the second biggest group are folks who are making it up on their own. Let me put the pieces together. There was, the speculation. Oh well, autistic people love fundamentalism, strict rules. It's very clear. This is how you do things. But it can't be arbitrary rules or rules that don't make sense to the person on the spectrum. So putting it together yourself is a lot more intuitive than just somebody saying, "Yep, these are the rules. This is what you're going to believe and do." So in some ways, I suspect there's been a lack of interest in autistic, especially adults, because it hasn't always shown up so evidently in congregational life,
Hmm.
especially for adults, because so many adults just are not a part of churches. And outside of that, there's all the social skills required to be a part of church that can prove to be barriers. Um, but I think in the evangelical literature, I see much more often uh, a realization they have young families,
Hmm.
and those young families have kids, and some of them are on the autistic spectrum, and a realization that if they don't try to include those kids within the life of the church, you're going to lose the families, and you're definitely going to lose those kids as they grow up. So the emphasis in evangelical circles is there. The only exception to this, and I feel like I need to read more. John Swinton in the UK. It feels like the UK is just more advanced on every level.
Yeah, yeah. The UK is far ahead on when it comes to all of this.
Yeah, and so John Swinton has tried to theologize thinking about autism, thinking about a wide range of disabilities, and thinking about it for adults. Where I honestly think Lamar's book might be the first one I've seen that deals with adults
Hmm.
in an evangelical context. And this book on Brazos Press might be, I haven't read it, but I think it's mainline. And it's an adult write in it sharing their own stories.
Hmm.
So I should have done my homework and read it beforehand, but it just came out in the last month or so.
Okay. Well, that
And
can
I
be a
can
topic of a future
a
episode.
future,
So,
yeah, just to kind of see where it's at. Now I had a not very generous take on the main line that because the main line's not interested in saving souls, uh, the impetus for doing any number of ministries is kind of shot is not always there. Like and a friend of mine noted that, for instance, if you wanted churches that responded to the deaf, you know, um, they're primarily going to be evangelical churches. Though apparently the Missouri Synod has a very active deaf ministry.
they
Yeah,
do. Yeah.
so that could be a critique of the main line. That it's the joy is I don't feel like I have to save any of my college students. I'm not there to convert them. It gives me access to students when they realize they're not my project. But the logic of it can be double-edged sword. It can reduce the impetus to do the kinds of outreach and hard work to
Hmm.
reach certain groups. If it feels like it, especially if it feels like it's out there somewhere.
So, where have you seen autism? Because you talked about this earlier, autism as a gift. Is it a
Mhm.
gift or is it a barrier? And you kind of said
Yeah.
it's a little bit of both, and I kind of agree with you. Where do you see it as a gift? How has it been a gift in your ministry?
Well, I think in the biggest way is just it sounds kind of weird, but access. It is one of those things where Christianity in the wider society, uh, in Blue America, is a problem, is a barrier.
Mhm.
It's a reason to distrust. And when I can share about my autism, it almost works in the same way that I can share about being gay, and the way that I've kind of sorted related that to my faith journey. It just opens doors of trust and community that wouldn't normally exist. Um, so that's been something I've kind of leaned on a bit, but I it almost always is a positive. It almost always opens doors that way. And boy, there's just so many autistic students on the campus who just need that, just to see adults in their life who all also have kind of wrestled with some of these things. Um, Definitely, like I said, the interest in theology, and there is a kind of sense of finely high-tuned. So I think ever since I was a kid, I was just had a very. I could tell when somebody was not included.
Mhm.
I could just tell when the way people. This sounds like a social skill, and it is, but somehow I could just tell when just the way people talk to somebody or about somebody or their physical interactions. My ear would be tuned to that, and ever since I was a kid, those are the people I would seek out and develop a connection with, so that I feel like that's a useful skill for ministry. There's always, you walk into a church within 5 seconds, you know who runs the show and who has the power, and sometimes that's a blessing. Some of those people are amazing; they do amazing work for the church. But obviously, we know where the limitations happen with such individuals. But there's always folks who just aren't, and being aware of who they are and their story and their life, I think has been an asset to ministry. Um, and I think I'm trying to think of one other. Um, yeah, I those are the initials. So those are the initial ones that come to mind. Um, and I suppose the flip side of the negative is um, like I said, I swear the biggest negative has been self-presentation. I just people just tell me how to dress and I just accept that and do it because I don't trust myself anymore. You know, like ministerial presence. That was the phrase that, when I was in seminary. What is your ministerial presence? How are you a non-anxious presence? And I've got ADHD and a bit of anxiety, and I've had these areas. So being that, I've actually had some levels of face blindness, and definitely names. Just if somebody is not in church almost every week, or I'm not following them on Facebook, I'm going to forget their name. I've had weird incidents. Uh, what has been both good and bad has been because I'm in such a healthy context. I'm seen as transparent,
Hmm.
and people trust me and my intentions in ministry. Uh, I think when I was in a hostile environment, it also meant I couldn't read the cues when people were organizing against me. I was oblivious. I was like literally hit sideways, and because I don't have that skill set to just notice people's people's appraisals of me, so if they're nice and they shake my hand at church, I go, wow, they must think the world of me. And then you hear later, well, maybe not, they're just that they know how to present niceness in a certain way, and it doesn't always pan out in a board meeting. But like I said, I've got a board that's just been so supportive and given me lots of leeway, and so right now that hasn't been an issue. But in the ministry, I think anybody on the spectrum, that's always hard if people are presenting two faces.
Hmm.
And I'm saying that without even insulting them. It's not like how dare you be two-faced. It's more just like they're they know the social rules of how you behave at church, and they know how to organize if
Yes,
they
yeah.
want to. Yeah.
Well, I think that one of the things that has been positive is, um, there's the verse in the Bible that says about loving, and in the Gospels actually, about loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And
Mhm.
that last part has always been something that's been meaningful to me. Um, is because as a kid, well, even as an adult, when people would say, you know, we have to love them with our hearts, I didn't understand what that meant because it's like
Mhm.
my actual physical heart, and so it meant something that, the mind could be used for God, because I think sometimes we have, at least especially in the history of the church, hasn't always been good about honoring, the life of the mind, and I think having that, I think, has been helpful to see that that's lifted up as well. And if there is anything about being on the spectrum, is that you're inside your mind a lot. So,
Yeah, I there's a that was a weird sense of that too when I was reading uh, Asperger's Inside and Out, or um, when I was in university for a period of time when I was in college, and many of the students came from Pentecostal backgrounds, and I grew up Presbyterian, and so uh, they really would look at you to see, like when you were in church or in worship, like, how emotional are you? How expressive are you at this moment? And they would notice that I wasn't always as expressive as they were hoping. And then that would start to go, well, wait a minute, are you really into this? Maybe you're not really so Christian as we thought, because we measured it by expression. And I was bummed. I was ashamed. I was disturbed that that was the case. Not at them, but at myself. And maybe I should be more. I'm kind of a little bit beating myself up over it. And reading the autism, going, oh, I was beating myself up over a personality and a certain disposition of being in the world.
mhm.
So it wasn't that I wasn't into it, but like you said, the life of the mind was the way that that expressed itself, not at this particular expressive moment. in a evangelical service, for instance. And it doesn't mean that I was less Christian or less engaged in the moment. But that took learning about Asperger's later on to go back to my younger self and go, oh, I wasn't doing it wrong. I just, yeah. And yeah, I suspect that in our social political climate, the ability to use reason in a certain way in the life of faith will prove to be more important. There'll be a recovery of it because that hasn't been attended to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Has there been other kind of strengths that you've seen, especially parish ministry?
I know. I think that there has, at least it used to be a challenge for me about preaching, but that's, I think, gotten easier the more I do it. But it's still hard sometimes to, at least for me to, because I think the literal nature of everything, it's hard for me sometimes to play, for lack of a better word, play with the text that you can, as I think a lot of other pastors tend to do. So I have to kind of give myself permission to do that, and not always be so literal in presentation. But I think those are challenges. But I think other gifts is, I don't know, sometimes being able to kind of see things, I won't say without emotion, but kind of less emotional has been, I think, a help. Because I think sometimes when people get so caught up in emotion, they're not thinking clearly. And I think for me, it's been helpful to be able to look at a situation and kind of talk about it, and without kind of getting my emotions in there that can kind of shut things down. And I think that's been something I see as a gift, because I think sometimes you need to not have, especially in any ministry, you have to not always be incredibly emotional. You have to, maybe for lack of a better word, somewhat detached. And I think that that's helpful. At least it has been helpful for me.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm not trying to think of the word. It's not a peacemaker, but I definitely have diffused conflicts. I don't know if I'm a peacemaker in the sense of, I don't know if I can get anybody, who are utterly opposed. It's not that. It's more like you said. There's this tension. There's this emotional conflict. Is there a way to just, talk, lay it out without that, and in a way that we can talk about it with, kind of put that a little bit, some of the emotion to the side and just look at the situation. And yeah, I can see where that has played a role. And like you said too, boy, sermon writing when I first went to seminary, not sermon writing, really, delivery has been tricky, and but now I've been doing it for a while now. So I don't get that kind of feedback very often. If I have to do something impromptu, Pat, because I've been doing a lot of guest preaching. So, Pastor, we decided that you're going to do the children's moment, and we're going to move it right here. And could you go ahead and do that? The children will be here in 5 minutes. I can do it. I won't get emotionally flustered. And this is Fleming. So that's good, because that would have been an occasion when I was younger that I would have just not been able to work with it. And I can work with it now, but I can't say I produced my best product. If it's not on paper and I haven't thought about it, and you throw something at me, it will likely do. But in terms of the sermon writing and delivery and all that, it's gotten a lot easier just because time.
Well, what other gifts do you think you have found from being on the spectrum?
In terms of pastoring or
Yep,
just
in terms of ministry.
my cats are fighting right now. So could you repeat that one more time?
Basically, what other gifts have you found for being on the spectrum in the ministry?
In the ministry. Well, I'm trying to think. I think that kind of sense of transparency does help in terms of church organization and boards. Like I said, if you've got a board that's willing to work with you, and then that's the idea that there isn't some sort of ulterior motive when I'm trying to do something. That I'll tell you why I'm trying to do something pretty straightforwardly, and
Mm-hmm.
whether they'll agree or not, but at least so it builds trust. Um, Weirdly enough, I think even though I've not done a whole lot of work on this, any kind of youth programming kind of, I think, kind of is likely to work when I've been a part of it for that same reason. I'm not trying to manipulate you kids to do X, Y, and Z, and so they can build a trust and rapport. Um, I think, um, like I said, I think it's more that it fed into the interest that I have gifts in the life of the church that I think developed because of autism, or at least it got fueled by it. So the interest in like theology, for instance, because there isn't a sermon that I'm or prayer, anything that I'm not overthinking in terms of what are the theological, bits that I don't want to say anything that's not going to lead you, put that out there. Um, I think that was partly autistic. I'll tell you a weird thing when you mentioned about computers and communications. I had a fascination with that when I was a kid. I would design my own travel brochures. I love travel brochures. I used to. I collect. I had. I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of maps, but I was a map kid. I was. I and I always was visualizing how do you present this idea, or how does what would be. And I grew up in rural eastern Montana, so I was like, I'm going to make a brochure that's going to make you think Terry, Montana is the most amazing place, and it has its charms, but there's no way to sell it as a community. But as a kid, it like really interests me, and so it's been this. Even though don't have any technical proficiency, whenever it's making a website, making a newsletter, uh, doing the kind of reports that I put out for UCM to our adjudicatories, I I always I'm into it, and I usually get some compliments off of it. And I think it's just been that's not autism, but the fact that I got into it as a kid and that was this driving thing, my autism helped in
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that you're into. So to the degree that the things you're into fit with life of the church. Um, I also discovered one other feature, which is a side thing, which we side discussion is that I'm actually pretty decent on many social interactions with his church. One of the things that I have discovered is that if I'm in a different context that I don't have an interest in or background in or knowledge of, I don't display those same skills. so so put me in church or political stuff or music, or there's certain kind of things that I'm interested in, and boom, I'm in there and I'm having great social, getting energy and doing all that. And the moment they're like, yeah, we're gonna do this, that total different context, like social occasions with church members outside of the church. I'm just like, my social skills is so I don't know if that's a gift and curse. But I realize it's a gift in the sense of, because I know the church and I've spent my life in it, I know how to socially negotiate that space really well,
Mm-hmm.
which is an
Mm-hmm.
odd thing to say about somebody on the spectrum. But I literally, when we were on vacation, my adoptive dad, we went to church,
Mm-hmm.
which apparently it comes up every once in a while on Twitter, like, really? Like every Sunday? unless I was sick or they were sick, every Sunday. It was just a part of my life. So yeah, that's proved useful. I don't know. Is there anything if that fits with your experience?
Yeah, there is some negotiation that has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't. I think in more recent times, I haven't really shared as much in church about my diagnosis. I
Mm-hmm.
think partially just for, again, bad experiences in the past, so I don't kind of bring it up as much. But it's kind of trying to do what you can, and there are still challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges is um, phones still. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think a lot of the job sometimes is using phones, and I'm still trying to kind of get more used to that. Um, that a lot of people do still communicate on phones as a phone is to be used, and and things like checking voicemail. I don't know why that has always been a challenge for me, but it has.
Mm-hmm.
I think partially because it's trying to remember something or track something, and it's just hard um, to keep track of all of it. So it's just I don't like to do it. Um,
Yeah, I've had it. I recognize all this.
I figured you would.
Yeah. I have it's a gift and a not a gift. I get easily overwhelmed,
Mm-hmm.
and so I have developed a highly skilled set or skills of I just focus on what I need to focus on, which is a great skill set. And when we were putting together a dinner, we had over 100 people, and we had auction items and the speaker and bringing and figuring out the menus. It was a lot, and but there was, but so that when somebody else is going, hey, pay attention to me by voicemail, call, or an email that is really important. I'm going to get back to it. I'm just like, nope, that's gone. That doesn't exist. And it, for the most part, it's a good skill set.
Mm.
But I have made things drop. I've dropped things. I mean, because it was important. I needed to check that voice.
Yeah,
you know,
it is.
there's those kind of things where you're like it's a good skill set to go. The metaphor for when I was working in a motel as a night auditor, I asked my boss, I can get if someone wants to do a reservation. What I asked my boss was, I need to give everything to that person, which means I can't answer or put them on hold and pick up somebody else. And since it was night audit, they didn't care because you're not getting a ton of phone calls, for reservations at night like that. But it did happen. And the person in front of me loved it. Or even when I'm not even good at acknowledging when I'm at the front desk that there's a line. And I'm just with that one person. I'm giving them my everything, and
Mm.
they love it. And then everybody else is kind of a little bit miffed because their thing didn't get the attention. So, anyways, phones have this kind of feel of I don't know what the word is. Uh, they're but there is a kind of like almost annoying kind of obligation, even if it's a good obligation and a serious one. The fact that it comes through a phone call or a message, and I'm just like, I almost feel unhappy, like, how dare you message me? Where if it's person to person, I'll
Yeah.
100%. But the moment I get this external other thing, I'm just like, should I answer this email that was sent to me this last week? Oh shoot, it's been over a week now. Then you get anxiety about that, which actually makes you less inclined to.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Anyways, yeah, I totally get that. I totally get what you're saying there. Yeah. And also because older folks, yes, in particular elderly, the phones are important.
Yeah, and that's something you really can't. you can't ignore.
Yeah.
I have older people in my congregation. You know, they have email addresses, but they are probably not checking it as much as I would. So you just have to call. And I think for me, it's just trying to kind of remember what I need to say, what I need to try to talk about, and just kind of. I mean, it sounds horrible, someone who isn't on the spectrum, but it's basically having to just get through it and to do it because it's important to that other person. Um, Even if I don't think it makes any sense, it does matter to that person, and I have to try to do the best that I can.
Well, and then this is kind of a running joke too, but I'm like, and then the voicemail, and I'm like, I've actually just now I say like, oh, I call a pastor, they're not in. Well, I could just give it to voicemail. Um, why don't you just write a note that say I called? Because if I get on the phone, I'm going to ramble in a weird way and not know when to shut.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then it's by that point, the message is over, and you haven't
Yeah,
even gotten to your point.
yeah, voicemail or ending the call or just interrupting the other person because they're on the phone and you're talking to them, and that, like, maybe I do pick up on cues because when I'm talking to a person in person, I feel like I'm getting some of that. And there can be this natural flow. And when I'm on the phone, I get no natural flow. I might talk over somebody. I'm like, oh, is this a good time to say goodbye now? No, I don't know. Oh, shoot, you're still talking. I'm so sorry that you're talking. I continue. Yeah, that's weird. Yeah, phones have that.
Well, this is actually it makes me think about another thing is because I think one of the things that pastors have to learn to be adept at is small talk, and
Yeah.
that has been hard. I mean, I think I'm learning, but it's it's never made sense to me anyway.
Mhm.
That's and most people who are on the spectrum, it doesn't make sense to them at all. But it's also a vital part of ministry. You have to learn how to kind of just talk about life and even in ways that don't necessarily relate exactly to the reason you're talking to them.
Yeah. That's an interesting I hadn't thought about that, but the more I think about it, I think you're right. I think I could do it with college students because I was in grad school forever. I don't recommend this route. I really wanted Bernie to win and my student loans forgiven, but that's another side story. So I went to school for a very long time. Um, and so the point is, it's not that to say, yeah, it is kind of scripts, but I kind of know. I know what it's like to be a grad student. I know what it's like to be an undergrad. I know what it's like when you're right. I mean, there's a big chemistry test, and the vice president of the LGBT group is freaking out a bit about the chemistry test, and I can, you know, I can solicit that. And when I've been doing parish ministry or like when I've been doing pulpit supply, I'm less adept
Hmm.
because their lives don't look like college student lives, and so I don't have a lot of scripts. Um, unless it's church stuff. But if it's church stuff, that's great. But I mean, like you said, the kind of stuff of, well, how's your horses doing? I don't know. To be Montana example. Oh, I heard you went hiking somewhere, hunting somewhere. I don't have a lot of scripts
Hmm.
because Jim and I, we I don't know. Uh, our our life doesn't always look like parishioners' lives.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and what's funny is, not to say these are related, but the ones that are most like our lives are other gay people. So
Hmm.
some of the scripts work for gay people in a way that a heterosexual family it wouldn't.
So I think this is kind of I want to make it kind of the closing question, but it's a
Mhm,
there are obviously people right now that are going through seminary
mhm,
and they may either already been diagnosed with Asperger's autism, or at some point down the road they will be. Um,
Yeah.
um, what do you say to these people? What word of advice or hope would you want to give to them?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm interested in this. I do have some follow-up questions that might
Yeah,
be
yeah,
from
yeah.
the podcast too. Boy, I would say that I got mixed encouragement in seminary. Um, so I mean, some people really could see my gifts. Other people were really worried about my presentation style and Asperger's and whether it wouldn't undermine my ministry. Uh, my experience has been it's been a net plus. It's not been a net negative.
Hmm.
Uh, and so my also experience being on the spectrum is that it took me a long time to believe in myself and believe in my ability to do ministry. um, and so if there's, I don't know if there's a word of hope to say, the imposter syndrome will go away, first of all, I think. And you really can do it. And you have this unique set of gifts. And if you run into any kind of roadblocks, I mean, well, how to say this? This is not being clear, but like so. A lot of times, autistic people learn the social skills; they just learn it later, and it might be
Hmm.
a different method. It's not like you don't learn it. So you may be, if you do run into roadblocks in your seminary or your internship, and you're like, "Wow, I'm not that great at preaching. I just messed up this social situation. How in the heck could I possibly do this?" Know that you can. Do not use seminary as the measure, um,
Hmm.
and because you will just get good at this, and because you have this unique life history and set of gifts. There's a reason you were called to seminary. There's a reason you felt this call in you, and to really lean on that, and you will get some of the validations. But I mean, maybe the last thing would be to find those validations and find those contexts that will honor your gifts, um, because there's enough self-doubt when you're in seminary and ministry. It's useful to have some cheerleaders along the way. So that would be, I don't know, that's a, I don't want to say it gets better, but it really does in
It
a way. You just,
does.
yeah.
I think it does get better. There are always going to be challenges, but I think over time you learn, and I think you also learn what you do well, what
Mhm.
you don't do as well, and I think it just takes time.
And by the way, that's maybe an additional part is when I first looked for a church job, I was very lucky and I found a great church. But my questions were, will you hire me? And can I make it? Can I make enough to get by? Now that I've been doing ministry well, I have much more specific questions. And what I same thing, like I know certain contexts where my personality and my skill set and even my Asperger's will be welcomed as gifts in certain churches
Hmm.
and contexts. And there are some that they just will not. And one of the nice things that's as you get older is you have a better ear for that. Uh, so the chances of you having a study that will support you will in your ministry will grow in time, because you'll just know these are the contexts I thrive in, and not, you know.
Hmm.
Like for instance, I'm in a campus ministry that's kind of small and rural, and it's really relational, and people knowing each other through the local church, and the students. It's very small, informal community. It's very different than if I was supposed to be a big fundraiser who had to impress big donors. I don't think I ever could. I don't have to. I just have to be able to work with students and get along with church people. And so this ministry has been just feeding on my strength, but not every campus ministry could do that. But there are churches out, but there are churches for you on the spectrum, and amazing in the sense of what gifts you can bring to that. So My question I always wondered if it's not going to be uniform in any way, but as I see an increased number of folks, especially on Twitter, who either claim either being on the spectrum or being neurodiverse, it makes me wonder. And I follow a lot of folks who are in seminary that way. Um, I wonder if theology will look different if autistic people do it. So thinking of liberation, it's like there's a difference from your social location to what kind of theology you would produce. And I kind of want somebody to write that book.
Well, I
I
think it
don't know
would
how.
be. I think it's
Yeah.
going to be somewhat different in how, just because our outlook is a little bit different.
Hmm.
It's a little bit more cerebral. Um,
Hmm.
I would, yeah, I think I would be curious to see how that would too. I think it would be different, and I think, but I just don't know, to what extent would it be different. Um,
Hmm.
but I think it would be. I think it would be a different way of looking at faith, that we have, that people aren't always used to seeing. Um, I think it'll be a bit, like I said before, probably less emotional, but
Hmm.
more, I could see it being more logical or more philosophical.
Hmm.
Um, and that's not to say that the concepts of faith won't be included in that, but
Yeah.
I think it'll just come. I think it's going to be coming from a different direction, um, than what it would usually be from people who are neurotypical.
Yeah. I kind of, if I had an idea, I run into, especially there's some Jewish rabbis who are on the spectrum, and I always wondered, like, I wonder, like, maybe what you do is like a theology anthology from folks on the spectrum, and maybe it wouldn't look dramatically different, but just a way of highlighting certain voices and in the in ministry settings, and with the value be it, oh, look at, I see that there are pastors and rabbis and Christian ed directors and
Yeah,
you know,
I would be curious to see how that, um, and who knows, maybe in a few years we will start to see that more, because I
yeah,
think for a long time we haven't, partially because this wasn't talked about as much. You had mentioned earlier that it wasn't in the DSM until I think it was '94.
yeah,
So no one really even had a language for it until 30 years ago. So, um, I could see it happening more. Um, my guess, though, is because where we will see it happening first will be in two places.
hmm,
One would be the UK, as we
yes,
discussed earlier, and then
yeah,
second within evangelical circles. Those are the places you'll see it first, but then it will move on to other parts of Christianity.
yeah. I can see that. And interesting, there was a Catholic priest I follow on the spectrum, and I don't think we agree on anything politically, but it's always interesting to see his posts, and I follow him on Twitter. Um, um, and to see a Catholic priest reflect on what the autism looks like in that context, see it. Yeah, it's kind of curious, but I could see that trajectory going just that way.
Yeah,
Well,
who knows? Did you have
well,
another question?
oh, well, okay. So I do the second one is I didn't know how to answer. There's a guy I just need to connect you to on Facebook, James Matthew Barnum. So we
Hmm.
started an adult autism group when I was in Oklahoma, and he is connected with the humanistic Jewish movement, and he helps put together their magazine, and he's on the spectrum himself, and he is thinking through aloud. Um, there might be two sets of questions. One is how can faith communities be supportive of folks in leadership on the spectrum, which is usually what's in my head. Though I
Hmm.
think broader to how would you support lay people as well. and anybody on the spectrum, or how they feel that this worship space included them. And he asked me for ideas, and I have to admit, I have minor sensory issues. They're not the first thing people notice. The social awkwardness they notice, right? but sensory is not. So you have the image of the kid with the earphones in the sanctuary because the music's too loud, or explaining the transitions. We're doing this, but now we're going to move to here. But I don't really feel like I'm adept yet at thinking, especially for adults. When I've talked to adults who have lay people on the spectrum, it's what to do with socialization, social hour, coffee hour, or what's allowed or not allowed in the sanctuary. I had a autistic grad student who would just sigh in the middle of the sermon at just the right moment. And it was not about the sermon. It was him checking into his own body, but everybody else would give them that look. I'll connect you to, but I haven't. I feel like there's some work being done on it, but I don't feel like I bring that much knowledge necessarily to it. Outside of, yeah.
I think one of the things that would need to be done, I think within the church, probably in the wider society, but that there needs to be a lot more grace.
Yeah.
Because I think the thing that with people on the spectrum is that they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to do things that will bother people or get on people's nerves. And I think it's to understand that they're trying, and if they do something that kind of bugs you, it's not necessarily that they're trying to do it on purpose or to be mean. I think they're just trying to figure out life. And I think that's maybe the one thing that I wish I would have had in my early years as a minister, is a little bit more grace and understanding. That I'm not a weirdo, or maybe I am, but
but it can be incorporated.
That it can be incorporated, and that it's okay. I think that's the thing that I think we need to hear of, especially.
Yeah, well, and just with that vein, that I didn't appreciate, but it's become a central focus also of my ministry. Because I'm not always good at registering my own emotions, but and going, that's what that feeling is, and that's what that feeling is. But as I've gotten older, I look back and realize I just had a tremendous lack of self-confidence ever since I was a kid, and I feel like what I do in college ministry is me doing affirmation and say, you really are valuable. You have you're a unique person that brings these gifts, and we're so glad. As John Swinton says, love says, I'm glad you exist, and I'm glad you're here. And having folks believe that and feel that kind of sense. Yeah. And I didn't realize how much, like you said, that I was missing that when I was younger.
Yeah, because and that does affect your self-confidence a lot. You don't think you can, that you're smart enough or anything. And I think it's important to tell people that they're valued, and that they're loved.
Yeah, in my first church, I had a woman come up to me after a sermon, and she patted me on the chest, and she said, "There's a lot of good stuff in there." And I still remember that moment, like all through ministry, that one moment.
That had to mean a lot.
Yeah, it was like, it just, for whatever reason, the right moment, I needed to hear something like that. So, yeah.
Well, this has been a good conversation, and I kind of don't think it will be the last one on this.
I'd love to continue. Yeah.
So.
No, definitely let's do this again.
Yes, definitely.
And I was going to ask things, but that might not be in your podcast.
Okay.
No, nothing personal. It was just stuff I wanted to like show you things.
Okay.
What is my husband? If he might be working on a sermon. Oh, I think he went out. Anyways, I was going to. Have you met Jim before or talked to him?
No, I haven't.
I think you're Facebook friends with him.
Mm-hmm, I am.
Okay. So besides the two kids, I was just going to introduce you to Jim. Like, oh, you should say hi. But yeah. So how do you do your podcast? Like, do you have to go through and edit stuff, or do you just and then kind of post, or how do you normally do it?
Well, a lot of it there is some editing. If I'm doing it like here, depending, sometimes I just maybe do some edit that's things that probably shouldn't be in the podcast that you can take out, but it doesn't take a huge amount of time. The other part of that is that I usually create a beginning part and an ending part, and so then I have to write up a script for that and then record it.
Okay.
But other than that, it's not a huge long process because I already have kind of the basis of the episode as a template. And so for the music and all of that, so I just kind of put things in and then kind of make sure rearrange things so that they adjust and so that they work properly and hit things at the right time. And that's it.
No, that's great. Well, I'll let me know when you post it, but
I will definitely.
No, that'd be great. And let's see, I'll show you email here. This is we've got Tuxedo Cat.
Oh, I love Tuxedo Cats.
It's my first one. He's great though, lots of personality. And yeah, we want to do this again sometime, but or pick up a different. Let me find that book title just so that you have it. There's two books on autism. I haven't read books on autism in a long time, actually. Like I read a flurry of them for years, and especially when I've been working with college students, there's a lot of young adult autism books and life skills books that I read, but it's been a few years. And but We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation with Eric Garcia.
I've heard about that one. I've heard him being interviewed. It's a very good one.
Yeah, and I'll have to, and then this is the one on religion.
Okay.
On the spectrum, autism, faith, and the gifts of neurodiversity. He is an author, poet, associate professor of English at Taylor University.
And is that John Swinton?
No, Daniel Bowman Jr.
Okay, Daniel Bowman Jr. Okay, good to know that.
Sarah Bessie endorses it. I'm trying to look at it. I don't recognize the names. Besides that, that's Brazos Press. So I don't know if it's a mainline or evangelical or so, kind of hovering on that.
Brazos kind of hovers on the borders of the two.
That's what I kind of was imagining. And then who's what was the name you just asked about?
Well, you said I brought up John Swinton.
Yeah, John Swinton. Yeah, I'm kind of curious because he's been I love listening to his lectures, and I have a book of his that I've read partly through on dementia, and I know that there's a book out there on autism that I've only seen him give some lectures on it. I haven't really read anything, but it just strikes me as somebody that I ought to be reading more of.
Yep, I get it.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate this.
Okay, I do too. All right. Take care.
Thanks.
See you.
You too.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
Good about it, everything that is not so good about it, but it's something that you don't hear much on media, and this is a way of getting that news about this tradition out there. And if you do sign up, either leaving a rating or a review, it makes it a lot easier for someone who may be trying to find stuff like this to find it. So if you can, please do that. And especially if you can do that on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, that will be helpful. Also, make sure that you visit our website at enroutepodcast.org. While you're there, you can sign up to get on the mailing list of the newsletter. You can listen to past episodes. You can read some articles that I've written. And you can also leave a donation. Do all of that. You can do all of that at the website at enroutepodcast.org. So that is it for this episode of En Route, a journey on religion and modern life. I am Dennis Sanders. I've been your host. Take care, Godspeed, and we will see you again soon.